When Sarah set out for a solo hike that morning, she thought she'd be alone for 3 days. She had no idea that a mysterious stray dog would follow her deep into the wilderness and lead her to save a man's life. Sarah Williams loved hiking alone. It was her way of escaping the chaos of her busy life as a nurse in Seattle, disconnecting from the endless stream of patients and paperwork and finding peace in nature's silence. On this particular weekend in October, she chose the most remote trail she could find in the Cascade Mountains, far from any roads or towns. The crisp autumn air and the golden light filtering through the pine trees created the perfect sanctuary she desperately needed. But then she felt it, that strange, prickling sensation at the back of her neck, as if someone or something was watching her every move. The mysterious watcher. Turning around slowly, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Standing about 15 feet behind her was a dog unlike any she'd ever seen. It was medium-sized, with a thick coat that might have once been beautiful, but was now matted and dirty, covered in burrs and mud. The animal was painfully thin. Sarah could see its ribs pressing against its fur, and its hip bones jutted out sharply beneath the tangled coat. It was the dog's eyes that stopped her cold. They were a striking amber color, and they held an intelligence that seemed almost human. The dog didn't bark or approach. It just stood there, perfectly still, watching her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "Hey there," Sarah called softly, taking a cautious step forward. The dog didn't move, didn't wag its tail, didn't show any of the typical signs of a friendly stray, looking for food or attention. It just continued staring at her with those piercing amber eyes, as if it were studying her, measuring her somehow. Sarah waited a few more moments, then turned and continued hiking, assuming the dog would lose interest and wander off to find easier prey. But when she glanced back 5 minutes later, the dog was still there, following at the exact same distance, matching her pace perfectly. The persistent shadow. This pattern continued for the next several hours, and it began to unnerve Sarah more than she cared to admit. The dog maintained a precise 15-foot distance behind her, never getting closer, never falling further back. When she stopped to rest, the dog stopped. When she resumed hiking, the dog resumed following. When she tried to get a better look at it, by turning around quickly, the dog would sit down calmly and wait, as if it had all the time in the world. "What do you want?" Sarah called back to the dog during one of her rest stops. The dog tilted its head slightly, but offered no other response. It didn't beg, didn't whine, didn't display any of the behaviors Sarah associated with stray animals. It simply watched and waited, with the patience of a creature that had learned to survive on its own terms. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself becoming oddly comforted by the rhythmic sound of paws padding softly behind her on the trail. The dog's presence was quiet, but constant, like having a silent guardian she never knew she needed. An unexpected connection. After miles of silent companionship, Sarah couldn't ignore her mysterious follower any longer. During her lunch break, she sat on a fallen log and pulled out a turkey sandwich, very aware of the dog sitting exactly 15 feet away, watching her every move. "You're hungry, aren't you?" she said quietly. For the first time, the dog's ears perked up at the sound of her voice, and Sarah thought she saw the faintest wag of its tail. Her heart clenched as she looked at the animal's emaciated frame. Pulling her sandwich apart, she tossed half of it toward the dog. The dog approached the food cautiously, sniffed it carefully, then devoured it in seconds, as if it hadn't eaten in days. When it finished, it looked back at Sarah with what she could only describe as gratitude before returning to its watching post. "I guess we're traveling companions now," Sarah said with a small smile. That night, as Sarah set up her tent in a small clearing, the dog maintained its respectful distance but never took its eyes off her. She could feel its presence even in the darkness, a comforting weight in the vast wilderness around them. Sarah woke in the middle of the night to find something warm pressed against the side of her tent. Peering out through the mesh window, she saw the dog curled up next to her tent wall, close enough that she could hear its steady breathing. For the first time since they'd met, the animal had broken its 15-foot rule. "I guess you're not as tough as you pretend to be," Sarah whispered into the darkness. The dog's ear twitched at her voice, but it didn't move away. Something about this moment felt like a breakthrough, as if an invisible barrier between them had finally crumbled. In the morning, Sarah noticed the change immediately. The dog no longer kept its rigid distance. Instead, it walked beside her, occasionally trotting ahead to investigate interesting scents before circling back to her side. When Sarah spoke to it, which she found herself doing more and more often, the dog's ears would swivel toward her voice and its tail would wag slightly. "You know, I came out here to be alone," Sarah said, as they navigated a particularly rocky section of the trail. "But I have to admit, your company isn't half bad." The dog looked up at her with those intelligent amber eyes, and Sarah could swear it understood every word she said. The sudden change. On the second day of their journey together, Sarah had just decided that she would try to take the dog home with her when something unexpected happened. They were following the main trail back toward the parking area when the dog suddenly froze in the middle of the path. The dog stood completely motionless, its ears pricked forward, and its nose twitching frantically in the air. Every muscle in its body was tense, coiled like a spring ready to release. Then, without any warning whatsoever, it bolted off the trail and crashed through the dense undergrowth toward a steep ravine. "Hey, where are you going?" Sarah shouted, her heart pounding as she sprinted after the dog. Tree branches slapped at her face and arms as she pushed through the thick forest, following the sound of the dog's frantic barking echoing through the trees. Sarah's mind raced with worry. What if the dog was injured? What if it was in some kind of trouble? After 2 days of building trust, she couldn't bear the thought of losing her mysterious companion now. The barking grew louder and more urgent, and Sarah could hear something desperate in the dog's voice that made her stomach clench with dread. A surprising discovery. Sarah burst through the last line of trees and found herself at the edge of a deep ravine. The dog was standing at the very edge, barking frantically down into the rocky depths below. Following the dog's gaze, Sarah's blood ran cold. 30 feet below, partially hidden by fallen logs and scattered rocks, was a man in a torn jacket. He was lying motionless at an awkward angle, one leg clearly broken, his face pale and drawn with pain and exhaustion. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, scrambling to the edge of the ravine. "Hello, can you hear me?" The man's eyes barely opened at her voice, and he managed a weak wave. "Help," he called back, his voice barely audible. "Been here 3 days. Can't climb out." Sarah's hands shook as she pulled out her emergency satellite communicator, grateful that she'd splurged on the expensive device. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons as she activated the emergency beacon and spoke into the device. "This is Sarah Williams. I have an injured hiker in need of immediate rescue." She rattled off their GPS coordinates and described the man's condition in the clinical terms she'd learned as a nurse. As she worked to arrange the rescue, the dog sat beside her, no longer barking, but whimpering softly, its tail wagging with what looked like relief. It was as if the dog understood that help was finally coming. The realization. While they waited for the rescue team to arrive, Sarah carefully made her way down into the ravine to provide what medical assistance she could. The injured man introduced himself as Tom, a retired teacher who'd been hiking alone when he'd slipped on loose rocks and fallen. "I've been calling for help for days," Tom said weakly as Sarah checked his pulse and assessed his injuries. "No one ever comes down this trail." I thought I was gonna die here." Sarah looked back up at the dog, who was watching them intently from the edge of the ravine, and suddenly everything clicked into place. "The dog," she said quietly. "It knew you were here." Tom's eyes widened. "That dog's been here the whole time. It wouldn't leave me even when I told it to go find help. It just sat right there, like it was waiting for something." Sarah's throat tightened with emotion as she understood what had really happened. The dog wasn't just following me randomly. It was leading me here. It was trying to bring me to you. The dog had chosen her specifically, had followed her for miles through the wilderness, building trust and companionship until she cared enough about it to chase after it when it ran off the trail. The dog had orchestrated the entire rescue. The intense rescue. The rescue took several hours, but finally, the sound of helicopters filled the air. Paramedics rappelled down into the ravine, stabilized Tom's injuries, and carefully lifted him to safety. Throughout the entire operation, the dog never left the edge of the ravine, watching every move with intense focus. As Tom was loaded into the helicopter, he caught Sarah's eye and mouthed, "Thank you." But Sarah knew the thanks didn't belong to her. Standing at the edge of the ravine with the rescue complete, Sarah knelt down beside the dog and wrapped her arms around its neck. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered. "You weren't just following me. You were bringing me here to save him." The dog licked her face enthusiastically, its tail wagging so hard, its entire body wiggled with joy. For the first time since they'd met, the dog seemed completely relaxed, as if a great weight had been lifted from its shoulders. New beginnings. 6 months later, Sarah was back on the same trail, but this time she wasn't alone. Beside her walked a healthy, well-groomed dog with bright amber eyes and a collar that read Angel, the name that had stuck after their incredible adventure. "Ready for another hike, girl?" Sarah asked, scratching behind Angel's ears. Angel barked once and trotted ahead on the trail, but this time, Sarah knew she wasn't leading her toward danger. She was simply enjoying the freedom of the wilderness with her chosen human by her side. Sarah had learned something profound in those mountains about loyalty, about purpose, and about the incredible intelligence of animals. Angel hadn't just been a stray dog following a hiker. She had been a guardian angel with 4 legs and a mission to save a life, and she had chosen Sarah to help her complete that mission. Their bond had been forged through trust, tested by danger, and sealed by an act of pure heroism that reminded Sarah why she became a nurse in the first place. Sometimes, the most important thing we can do is simply show up when someone needs us most. If this story touched you, even just a little, please give it a like and let me know in the comments. Your thoughts truly mean the world to me and to all the pet lovers out there. Thank you for the love and empathy you bring into this world. If you felt a connection, please consider subscribing. I'd be honored to have you along for the journey. Until next time, take care of each other and hug your furry friends a little tighter tonight.